Disclaimer. Warning. This video may challenge deeply rooted beliefs and blow your mind. No animals were harmed in the making of this video though. The purpose is to provide information and encourage open, civilized debate. It may also shamelessly try to remind you to subscribe, like and share.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, all I ask from you is reasonable doubt. In the face of missing or conflicting evidence and uncertainty surrounding many aspects of the navigator's life, we have to ask, who was the man known as Columbus? You be the judge. As mentioned in the previous video, one of his sons wrote in La Historia de Don Fernando Colón that he had doubts about his famous father's true origins. If even his own son cast doubt on what was said at the time about Colón, we have reason to believe something fishy was going on. Either Fernando knew the truth and deliberately covered it up, or he genuinely didn't know, which begs the question, why so much secrecy? Why would such a notable man hide his past, even from his own family? To answer this question, the most relevant theories are the Genoese theory, the Jewish theory, and the Portuguese theory. They are presented in alphabetical order, and since all are speculative until proven, they hold equal weight. Let's start with the Genoese theory. It's the most widely accepted explanation, though increasingly questioned as more people investigate. This theory claims that Columbus came from a Genoese family of weavers. Cristofero Colombo didn't know how to read or write until he arrived in Portugal, apparently and supposedly swam 14 kilometers to shore after his ship sunk. Believe it or not, from an illiterate son of a weaver, he somehow learned Portuguese, Latin, Greek and Hebrew, cartography, astronomy and all the skills necessary to navigate the open ocean. Though there is no record of the great deeds he must have accomplished in order to move up in the social scale, Columbus managed to rise meteorically and marry into Portuguese nobility. Even more astonishing, he seems to be admitted into the most exclusive, members-only club of the time, the Order of Christ, the successor to the Knights Templar, and holder of ancient secrets and the driving force behind Portugal's secretive oceanic explorations. Knowing at the time that Portugal's goal was to find a route to the eastern spice trade by sailing around Africa, which they had achieved up to the Cape of Good Hope, Columbus decides to convince the King of Portugal, John II, to skip the remaining half of the venture and go west instead. As that change of plan made perfect sense, the king eagerly accepted. Just kidding. Columbus didn't succeed. So he moved to Portugal's rival Castile and offered the same proposal to the Catholic kings. And after several years of persistence, they ended up funding his voyage to reach Asia by sailing west, only for Columbus to get lost on the way and arrive in the New World instead, something he never admitted, and the rest is history. At this point, it should be noted that a Genovese native was deliberately instigating and leading a foreign nation to find an alternative route to the rich spice trade of the East. In doing so, Columbus dealt a serious blow to his native Genoa, which, along with Venice, was one of the few intermediaries with access to the lucrative Eastern spice trade monopoly controlled by the Ottomans. So not only did Columbus betray his homeland, but he also betrayed the Kingdom of Portugal by taking classified information out of the country and giving it to a rival power, an act punishable by execution. Yet, after his return from his first voyage, the first person he met was the Portuguese king, a man said to have killed his own brother-in-law for treason. But Columbus was allowed to leave without consequence. I'll leave it at that. In conclusion, there's a lot we don't know about this man, and much of what we do know doesn't add up. We are led to believe that despite all his accomplishments, fame and fortune, he couldn't shake his humble origins, so he felt compelled to hide them. At least that's what the Genovese theory speculates as a possible explanation to the navigator's evasiveness and his son's uncertainty.
Christopher Colon, the explorer credited with bridging the Old World and the New, remains an enigma. Some scholars propose a captivating theory that Colon was not Genoese, but a secret Jew, a Marrano, concealing his true faith amidst the rising tides of the Spanish Inquisition. This theory, though controversial, finds grounding in intriguing historical coincidences and tantalizing clues scattered throughout Colon's own writings and actions. The conventional account of Colon's life portrays him as born in Genoa, Italy, to a family of wool weavers. However, even these early accounts are riddled with inconsistencies and gaps, as seen in the previous video, leaving ample room for doubt and speculation. The Jewish theory, though lacking definitive proof, offers a compelling alternative narrative, suggesting Colon's motivations may have been deeply intertwined with the plight of Jews in late 15th century Europe. The expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492, a pivotal event coinciding with Colon's first voyage, forms a crucial backdrop for this theory. Could Colon, a man deeply familiar with navigation, cartography, and possessing unusual linguistic skills for his purported background, have been driven by a hidden agenda to find a safe haven for his persecuted people? Among the most compelling pieces of evidence supporting the Jewish ancestry theory are the curious Hebrew references in the letters of Colon to his son Diego. In 12 of his 13 letters sent from the Caribbean to Spain, there are inscriptions in Hebrew, Bet Hai representing the common expression Baruch Hashem, blessed be his name. Furthermore, Colon often signed his letters with a peculiar combination of letters, SSAS, a Kabbalistic signature, according to Warren Bratter. I quote, "The first group of letters in his signature represented the sacred Hebrew expression, Shaddai Shaddai Adonai Shabbatai, Holy, Holy is the Lord on high. The second group of letters, XMY, represents the Shema, the first lines of the prayer all Jews recite to affirm their monotheistic faith." Colon was asking for God's forgiveness, a clear admission of his repentance for having abandoned his Jewish faith and of having become a new Christian. The Colon following expo is called Sof Pasuk in Hebrew and is a punctuation mark that tells the prayer readers that they have reached the end of a line, Hebrew being written from right to left. End of quote. Colon also made references to the Old Testament and to the reconquest of Jerusalem and used Jewish terminology in some of his writings. Some historians argue that the Spanish Jewish community financed the expedition, and that his first letters were to his Jewish or conversed financiers instead of the kings. The financing of Colon's expeditions has long been a subject of debate. While King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain are credited as the primary patrons, historical records indicate that a significant portion of the funds came from private sources. Intriguingly, several of these financiers were prominent members of the Converso community, Jews who had publicly converted to Christianity but were suspected of secretly practicing their former faith. Among these figures were Luis de Santangel, the royal treasurer, and Gabriel Sanchez, a prominent merchant and advisor to the crown. Both men were known for their financial acumen and their close ties to the Converso community. Their willingness to risk vast sums on a risky venture led by a relatively unknown sailor has led some to believe they saw in Colon someone who understood their plight and might use his discoveries to create a safe haven for their people. While it's impossible to know with certainty whether these financiers saw in Colon a potential savior, their involvement raises intriguing questions about their motivations. Did they believe that by supporting his voyages, they were investing in a future where Jews could live freely, far from the reach of the Inquisition? The timing of Colon's first voyage, setting sail on August 3, 1492, has fueled speculation about his possible Jewish origins. According to some Jewish experts, Colon apparently delayed his departure from August 2 to August 3, 1492 due to its coincidence with Tisha B'Av, a Jewish fast day of mourning for the fall of the Jewish temples. It's a day of mourning, introspection, and reflection on the Jewish people's history of persecution and exile. But it also marked the deadline for Jews to leave Spain under the Alhambra Decree, issued just a few months earlier, which expelled all practicing Jews from the country. The convergence of these events, the expulsion, the timing of the voyage, and Colón's potential joints a compelling, albeit circumstantial case. It's also been speculated that part of the crew was made up of Jewish conversos and that his goal was to sail to Asia to obtain gold to finance a crusade to recover Jerusalem and rebuild the Temple of the Jews. While others believe he was actually aware from his contacts with Portuguese explorers that land existed to the west, so his real motivation was to find a safe haven for the persecuted Jews and conversos in the New World, the original American dream. In summary, the theory that Colón was a converso or Marrano Jew is presented as another possible explanation to why he was hiding his origins and real identity. He seemed to have enough enemies as a Christian, so this theory, however, does not shed light on who his Jewish ancestors might have been. It merely suggests possible links to Aragon, Genoa, or Portugal.
What's a coconut doing on a beach in Portugal? We'll get back to that in a moment. But first, let's clear something up. Yes, the Vikings reached America before Columbus, and possibly even the Romans and Carthaginians before them. However, their discoveries had no lasting impact. For centuries, the horizon remained shrouded in mystery. Here be dragons, as they say. Now, back to that coconut washed up on a central Portuguese beach. Every year, the tides carry all kinds of debris from the western shores of the Americas. Sometimes entire logs from Caribbean palm trees and other exotic plants make their way across the ocean like that coconut. The idea that mariners of the time had no suspicion of land to the west is simply not true. There were reports of sightings by fishermen, and some maps even depicted mythical islands to the west, like St. Brendan, and one with the now famous name of Brazil. In the 1450s, the Portuguese reached the westernmost islands of the Azores, Flores and Corvo, already in the North American plate. Diogo and João de Teve, two notable navigators, led these efforts. They were returning from an exploratory trip to Terra Nova, which we now know as Newfoundland. Fernando Colón, in his account of the life of his father, Christopher Columbus, supported by historian Bartolomé de las Casas, mentions that de Teve had sailed to the Americas around 40 years before Columbus. But this story isn't about who got there first. It's about a methodical, deliberate project to introduce the new world to the old one. Among all the theories, this one is perhaps the most widely fascinating, and it might just blow your mind. After all, if the world can accept the romanticized tale of an illiterate wool weaver's son who learned how to read and write, but never actually wrote a line in any Italian dialect to his supposed countrymen, who rose to marry into nobility in a foreign land, had audiences with kings, and supposedly had no idea what he had discovered, then surely the Portuguese theory sounds far more plausible. There isn't just one Portuguese theory, actually. At least three exist, reflecting the navigators' deeply ingrained connections in the country. But we will only focus on one, likely the most famous, which ties up more loose ends and is the most well-rounded. It's also supported by many researchers who have compiled decades of evidence. Their meticulous work sheds new light on the motivations behind Colón's voyages. Most stories start at the beginning, but not with this man. Colón is best described by Winston Churchill's famous remark, "It's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma." This lack of clarity only adds to the intrigue surrounding his origins. Was he deliberately hiding his past, or was it simply lost to time? What we do know, and all agree, is that Colón spent his formative years in Portugal, immersing himself in the maritime culture that would later define his career. He spent a significant part of his life there, marrying and fathering a son, yet there is no evidence he ever wrote in Portuguese. However, his Spanish writings are filled with what seems Portuguese grammatical structures and spelling mistakes, typical of someone whose mother tongue was Portuguese and who learned Spanish later. This is a crucial clue. One might expect to find traces of his existence in Portuguese records. After all, he was involved in significant maritime ventures. However, such documents are conspicuously absent. This absence suggests that the name Cristobal Colon, he used in Spain and later in his official documents, was not his real name. Moreover, some Spanish records refer to Colon as a foreigner, and even as Portuguese. This alone is a smoking gun, yet it has been strangely overlooked by historians, so distracted that they failed to notice he never wrote in any Italian dialect, not even in his correspondence with Genoese associates. Could he have been someone else entirely, hiding in plain sight? The mystery of Cristobal Colon's early life continues to captivate and confound, leaving us with more questions than answers. So, why the secrecy about his origins? To understand this, we need to look at the early reign of King Dom João II of Portugal. When he came to power, the new king declared he had been reduced to lord of the roads and paths of the country, and set out to reclaim property deeds that had been seized arbitrarily by the feudal nobility. This led to a failed conspiracy against him, and many noblemen who were not arrested or executed fled to Castile, fearing for their lives and forfeiting their property. Among those fleeing noblemen may have been a man who would come to be known as Cristobal Colon. This would give him a strong reason to hide his true identity. Yet, despite this, he maintained a curious familiarity with King João II, who referred to him as our special friend in Seville. King João was not only busy subduing internal rivals, but also externally. In 1480, the Treaty of Alcazovas was signed between Portugal and Spain, dividing the Atlantic into two zones of influence. This agreement was crucial for Portuguese expeditions along the African coast and their ambition to break into the Asian spice trade. But the Spanish were not deterred, so something more was needed to distract them. Coincidentally, Colon arrived in Castile seeking patronage for his ambitious expedition. Now that we have the context, what exactly is the Portuguese theory? According to researchers like Mascarenhas Barreto, Luciano da Silva and Manuel Rosa, Christopher Colom was a code name for a spy working for King João II of Portugal. His mission? To lead the Spanish astray by convincing them to sail westward to the New World, while the Portuguese pursued their true goal of navigating around Africa to reach Asia. By diverting Spain's attention to lands where there was little of commercial value, Columbus effectively sent them on a wild goose chase. Let that sink in. It sounds wild, but it makes sense when you connect the dots. The dark legend claiming that Columbus didn't know where he was, his stubborn insistence until his death that he had reached Asia, and even the oath he forced his crew to swear that they were in Asia. Furthermore, João II's swift reaction to Columbus's discoveries, claiming them for Portugal, and forcing a new treaty with a vertical line of demarcation, pushing the line from 100 to 370 leagues, thus securing a foothold in what would later become Brazil. All points to this being a carefully crafted ruse and a Machiavellian secret plan. Not to mention, upon his return from the New World, Columbus went to see the King of Portugal first, spending several days with him before informing the Spanish monarchs who had sponsored his journey. This could help explain why Colom eventually fell out of favor with the Spanish crown once it became clear that he hadn't reached Asia. After all, Portuguese vessels loaded with spices from the east were pouring into Lisbon, while the Spanish were struggling in the New World. Feeling a bit skeptic about this spy story? Wait, there's more. Well, Colom wasn't the only spy in the service of His Majesty King Dom Joam II, who is unfairly underrated by history. The king also sent spies on overland missions to India and to locate the mythical kingdom of Prester John. Dom João II, being the target of many conspiracies, relied on a secret intelligence network tasked not only with gathering information, but also with disinformation to protect the interests of the Portuguese crown, especially its project to reach India by sea, a plan that had been adopted from his great-great-uncle, Prince Henry the Navigator. Not so hard to believe once you remember that Portugal was at the forefront of this new era of discovery and expansion.
While this video was being made, a pseudo-documentary about an international DNA study aimed at determining Columbus's origins aired on Spanish television. The program began on a promising note, acknowledging that Columbus's history is shrouded in mystery and that he deliberately concealed his origins. The study, which began over 20 years ago, focused on analyzing the remains of Columbus in Seville, as well as those of his illegitimate son, Fernando or Hernando. They also tested the remains of Columbus's brother Diego. Surprisingly or not, the results suggested that Diego was not his biological brother, but rather a second-degree relative. A finding that aligns with the Portuguese theory, as you'll see later. Fast forward to the end of the documentary. All DNA samples supporting the Genoese theory, over 100 from individuals with the surname Colombo, had been tested and ruled out. The same process was applied to the Iberian theories, and all but one came back negative. Curiously, this theory was the only one in the documentary that lacked actual samples from potential relatives for comparison. Despite this, the DNA study concluded that Columbus's genome was compatible with Jewish ancestry, lending some genetic support to the Jewish theory presented here. The study fell short of providing the conclusive results many had hoped for, and the documentary quickly veered into unsupported speculation about his origins, contrary to the concrete answers the public was expecting. If anything, the DNA study definitively debunked the Genoese Colombo claim, instead shifting the focus of Columbus's genetic origins back to the Iberian Peninsula. Now, let's return to the Portuguese theory and the cryptic signature where we left off in the last video.
What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. So who was really this man that signed Expo Ferens? As you may have noticed, I never use the names Columbus or Colombo. These are not names the navigator ever used in his documents. He always went by the name Colon and signed using an abbreviated form for his first name. The first three letters, Expo, are an ancient Greek abbreviation for Christ, while Ferens is Latin, meaning bearing or carrying. Together they represent his first name, Christ-bearer. Christopher in English, Cristobal in Spanish, and Cristofam or Cristovam in 15th century Portuguese. Interestingly, his name is recorded in the Portuguese form very early on in the first Vatican documents, not in Latin nor in Spanish, but in Portuguese. The same goes for his surname Colom, spelled with an M as it would be in Portuguese, rather than the N used in Spanish. It's also important to note that whether spelled with an M or an N, his name does not translate to pigeon, which is the actual meaning of the Italian name Colombo or Columbus. In his biography, his son, Fernando Colon, clarified that his father's Latinized name should be Colonus, derived from the Greek for member, not from the Latin Columbus, meaning pigeon. That means that the mistranslation of his name was already widespread at the time due to printing. It's time the world, except for Spanish speakers, stopped calling him by the wrong name. As expected of a person who is determined to hide his real name and identity, Colon's signature is a puzzle that still defies resolution, but there have been a few attempts to crack it. According to the investigators Barreto and da Silva mentioned earlier, Colom was hiding his real name behind a cryptogram. As in the Jewish theory, the top of the signature, in a pyramidal shape, starts with what could be a prayer. In this case, the letters SSAS stand for Salve, Salve, Ave Salve, and XMY, Christ, Mary, Joseph, Colon Expo, Christ, Saviour, Salvador in Portuguese. Ferren, bearer, but also abbreviation of Fernandez, son of Fernando. Funny-looking S, actually a Z, represents his surname Zarco. So, according to this theory, his real name was Salvador Fernandez Zarco, born in Cuba, Portugal, a name that can also be found in his monogram by deciphering the letters S, F, and Z. Who then were Columbus's real parents? His real name was not Christopher Colon, Colombo, or Columbus, So forget everything you've learned about a Genoese weaver. His own genealogical record begins with him and his brothers. There is no mention of Domenico and Susanna Colombo, the parents traditionally attributed to him, nor any parents at all. This is exactly what you'd expect from someone who had adopted a new name and identity. So who were Columbus's real parents? That is extremely difficult to answer, as he made sure to conceal his origins, and any records have likely been altered or destroyed. However, some investigators believe clues to his identity can be found in the cryptic signature he used to sign his letters. His presumed father was a very powerful figure linked to navigation, which may explain Columbus's statement that he was not the first admiral in his family. One theory suggests that Dom Fernando de Portugal, Duke of Viseu and royal prince, may have been Columbus's father. Dom Fernando was the Master of the Order of Christ and played a key role in Portugal's maritime explorations from 1460 to 1470. He himself participated in expeditions along the Atlantic coast of Africa and possibly America, a fact known to a small circle of navigators at the time. These early expeditions were later invoked in claims challenging Columbus's inheritance rights in favor of his companions. On his mother's side, Columbus is believed to have been linked to Isabel Gonçalves Zarco, the daughter of João Gonçalves Zarco, a Portuguese knight and explorer who established settlements in the Madeira Islands where Columb married and lived. It is also possible that Columbus had Jewish converso ancestry through this lineage, as the Zarco family name was associated with prominent Jewish families in Portugal. Jews in Portugal enjoyed relative protection and held significant positions in society until the early 16th century. Colon's maternal grandmother may have been descended from the noble Colonna family of Italy, possibly inspiring his adopted surname Colon. Beauty of this theory is that, in the end, it ties together both the Italian and Jewish theories, as Colomb was a descendant of the Colonna family and had Jewish ancestry on his mother's side. Since this was a secret, illegitimate affair, the mother was sent to a remote property of Duke Fernando in the Portuguese village of Cuba, where she remained until the birth of their son, the future navigator. It's also worth noting that Duke Fernando reportedly had other illegitimate children with different women, which could help explain the results of his brother Diego Colon's DNA test. It's been a long journey, but at this stage, it's safe to say that Colon and Colombo are two different names, corresponding to two different persons. Even in the New World, we find echoes of his Portuguese ancestry, as many of the names Colomb gave to places in the Caribbean are of Portuguese origin and commonly found in Portugal. It is plausible that Colon wanted the island of Cuba, the place he referred to as the most wonderful sight he had ever seen, to bear the name of his birthplace, the Portuguese village of Cuba. Although Colomb named the island of Cuba Juana, he also used the name Cuba interchangeably. It's claimed that the island's name comes from a Taino word. One thing is certain, no semantic shift is needed for Cuba, the name of the Portuguese village where Duke Fernando had his family estate. If Colon's given name was indeed Salvador, it could explain why he named the first island he discovered Guanahani San Salvador. If Colomb was indeed a Portuguese spy, his mission was a resounding success. He successfully diverted Spanish attention and resources towards the Americas. This allowed Portugal to focus on its own explorations and conquests in the east. By the time Spain realized the true extent of Colon's deception, it was too late. Portugal had already established a firm foothold in the spice trade. The world had been irrevocably changed. Everything seems to point to a Portuguese origin that he worked very hard to conceal. If today, centuries after his voyages, Cristobal Colon's true identity remains a subject of debate. Was he a visionary explorer, driven by a genuine desire to discover new lands and expand the horizons of the known world? Or was he a cunning deceiver, manipulating events and people to serve his own ends, or perhaps a bit of both? The duality of his character adds to the intrigue, making it difficult to pin down a definitive answer. The evidence, while open to interpretation, suggests that there is more to this story than meets the eye. Perhaps we will never know the whole truth about Colom's origins. The mystery is compounded by the passage of time, with many original documents lost or destroyed and others forged. But by questioning the official narrative and embracing the mystery, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of history. Engaging in these debates allows us to explore different perspectives and understand the multifaceted nature of historical figures. The quest to uncover the truth about Colon challenges us to look beyond the surface and consider the broader context in which these events occurred. It is a reminder that history is not always as it seems. Despite all this, he remains known by the wrong name even today, a testament to how thoroughly he buried his true identity. Yet his tomb inscription hints that he hoped the truth would eventually come to light. In te, Domine, speravi, non confunda in aeternum. In thee, O Lord, I have hoped. I shall not be confounded forever. In the next video, we'll explore the curious coincidences between two kings, seemingly unrelated, who lived second lives after their supposed deaths. I'll see you then. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share.